Come here. Let me see your hands. Come here. What's going on? Get on the ground.
Daddy's dead.
Get on the ground. Both of you on the ground. On the ground. Yeah, let's go inside. Bring your hands up.
On the other end of the line was a woman who had just walked into a nightmare inside her own home. Her words were fractured, panicked, and chilling. Daddy's dead.
I'm gonna kill my dad. He said, I love you, man. I started hitting him, and he took a knife and just tried to slit his throat because I didn't want him to feel any more pain. Just wanted it to end.
It was a cold November morning in Ohio when officers responded to a frantic 911 call. On the other end of the line was a woman who had just walked into a nightmare inside her own home. Her words were fractured, panicked, and chilling. Daddy's dead. The woman was Anna Gulia. She had left the family home the day before to spend time with her daughter, Claire. She returned early the next morning, November 11th, 2023, expecting nothing more than to drop off cigarettes to her son, Robert, known to everyone as RJ. But instead of a quiet return, she stumbled into horror. When officers arrived at the scene, Anna stood outside, visibly shaken, her words struggling to form a clear picture of what she had seen. She explained that she had left for Claire's yesterday morning, spent the night there, and only returned home around 10 a.m. to check in. She wasn't expecting chaos, just the familiar comfort of her house. But as she walked inside, that comfort vanished. She first went to her back bedroom. Nothing seemed immediately wrong, but then she walked upstairs. That's when she froze. What she found was beyond anything she could have imagined. Her husband, Theodore, known as Ted, was lifeless. The sight was so disturbing that her first words to the responding officers were blunt and devastating. "He's dead." At that point, the situation was unclear. There were no immediate answers about what had happened or who was responsible, but Anna mentioned something important. Their son, Robert, had been at home with Ted. She hadn't seen him yet, but he was inside the house. As officers entered the Gulia home, tension filled the air. They moved cautiously, not knowing if they were walking into an active crime scene with a dangerous suspect still inside. "Come here, let me see your hands," one officer shouted as they approached. RJ emerged, his demeanor strangely detached for someone who had just lost his father. "Get on the ground," the officer ordered. Instead of confusion, panic, or grief, RJ responded flatly, almost eerily calm. "Daddy's dead." The word sent a chill through the officers. They restrained him quickly, securing both RJ and Anna, and began clearing the house. What they found was grim. Theodore Gulia, 64 years old, was lying cold and unresponsive. Blood pooled and splattered across walls and floors, evidence of a violent struggle. But something immediately struck investigators as odd. The body's positioning didn't seem to match the blood patterns around it. It was clear to them. The body had been moved. Whatever happened here was brutal, and it wasn't random. To understand what had led to this crime, detectives needed to understand the family inside the house. Theodore, Ted Gulia, was a husband, father, and a man who had worked hard to provide for his family. Those who knew him described him as strong-willed, sometimes strict, but ultimately devoted to his wife and children. Anna, his wife, was gentle, supportive, and protective of her children. She tried to keep peace in the household even as tensions grew over the years between Ted and their son, RJ. RJ, or Robert J. Gulia, was known to struggle. Friends and relatives described him as troubled, often distant, with signs of deep-rooted issues that had been building for years. There were whispers of mental health problems, violent outbursts, and strained family relationships. To his father, those struggles often came across as laziness, irresponsibility, or defiance, a constant source of conflict in the home. The family's other children, including their son Ben and Claire, had distanced themselves somewhat from the chaos in the home. They loved their father, but they were well aware of the toxic dynamic between Ted and RJ. And now, it seemed, that long-simmering tension had erupted into tragedy. As investigators began piecing things together, another figure entered the scene, Ben Gulia, RJ's brother. He had received a call that morning. His mother was hysterical, his father was dead, and he needed to come home immediately. Racing from work, Ben arrived at the house, only to be intercepted by police. His face was pale, his voice unsteady, his shock evident. "My mother called me. I'm at work today. My dad is dead." The officers kept him calm, guiding him through the steps. He had no weapons, just his wallet and headphones. But his grief quickly overwhelmed him. "I can't even go look," he admitted, breaking down in front of the officers. "We can't figure it out. He's dead. He's dead." The exchange between Ben and the officers was raw, unfiltered. He explained that the last time he had spoken to his dad was just the day before, as they were preparing for Thanksgiving. His father had even called him late that night, around midnight, but Ben had been asleep. When he saw the missed call that morning, it was already too late. The weight of guilt, regret, and shock pressed heavily on Ben. His father had reached out, but he hadn't answered, and now the man was gone. As officers pieced the family members' timelines together, one thing became clear. Only one person had been in the house with Theodore when he died. Anna was away at Claire's, Ben was at work, Claire was at her own home. That left only Robert. When questioned, RJ's statements were inconsistent. He first suggested that he had no idea what happened, claiming his father often slept for long periods. Then he began spinning a new story, one that involved intruders, neighbors, even his own mother. He suggested that someone had broken in during the night, killed his father, and tried to frame him. But the evidence told a different story. The body had been moved, the blood patterns contradicted his claims, and most importantly, RJ had been the only one present. Detectives already felt the weight of truth pressing down. RJ wasn't just a witness, he was the prime suspect. Investigators combed through the crime scene in meticulous detail. The sight was disturbing. Blood smeared across walls, pooled on the floors, and splattered in a way that told investigators a story. Each splatter, each stain showed direction and force. This wasn't one blow, or even two. It was a barrage, a relentless attack. Detectives noted the broken lamp near the bed. Its base was caked with blood. Nearby, a heavy flashlight, also stained. These were weapons of opportunity, items grabbed in the heat of violence. And then there was Theodore himself. His body bore the brutal truth. Dozens of wounds across his face and skull, fractures that spoke of overwhelming force. His arms had deep bruises, his knuckles scraped raw. He had tried to defend himself, but his strength wasn't enough against his own son's fury. The positioning of the body was telling. Drag marks on the carpet showed he had been moved after death. His final resting place, half covered with a blanket, appeared almost staged. To detectives, it looked like an effort not to hide the crime, but to conceal its savagery. It wasn't just murder, it was personal. Back outside, officers began the delicate process of interviewing the family. Anna was distraught, replaying her steps from the night before. She had been at her daughter Claire's, she explained, and returned only that morning. She never saw the attack, never heard anything out of place. Ben, still struggling to breathe through waves of grief, reiterated his timeline. He had been at work, completely unaware until his mother's frantic call. His guilt lingered on that missed call from his dad at midnight, but detectives assured him that nothing he could have done would have changed the outcome. And then there was RJ. From the very beginning, his words felt wrong. His first statement, "Daddy's dead," wasn't grief, but flat reporting, almost like he was reciting a fact. As detectives pressed him, the cracks widened. First, RJ claimed his father had been acting strangely, that maybe he had fallen and hurt himself. Then he shifted. He told detectives he thought someone had broken in during the night. Maybe it was the neighbors, or my mom. Maybe she knows something. The deflections piled up. At one point, he even claimed he had blacked out, that he woke up and just found his father like that. But the evidence didn't fit. There were no signs of forced entry, no footprints, no broken windows, no disturbed locks. The only signs of a struggle were between Ted and his killer, and that killer had been inside the house all along. As the interviews unfolded, detectives compared every word against the physical evidence. Anna's account checked out. Neighbors had seen her leaving the day before with Claire. Phone records confirmed calls between them throughout the evening. There was no doubt she had been away. Ben's story matched as well. Surveillance cameras at his workplace showed him clocking in that morning. Co-workers confirmed his presence. His alibi was airtight. But RJ? His story crumbled under the slightest pressure. Detectives noted how he stumbled over details, changed timelines, and pointed fingers at everyone but himself. And then came the most telling moment. When asked directly about the blood all over the upstairs room, RJ shrugged. "I don't know," he said flatly. "Maybe Dad hurt himself." It was a chilling response. His father's skull had been crushed, his face beaten beyond recognition. The brutality of the scene was undeniable, yet RJ spoke of it like a minor accident. The detectives exchanged looks. They had seen liars before, but rarely had they seen someone so cold, so detached from the horror he had unleashed. For Anna and Ben, the shift toward suspicion of RJ was devastating. Anna could barely process it. This was her son, the boy she had raised, cared for, worried over. She had known his struggles, seen his dark moods, but never imagined he could be capable of killing his own father. Ben's grief quickly hardened into anger. His voice trembled as he spoke to detectives. If he did this, if RJ really did this to Dad, his words trailed off, but the implication was clear. The bond of brotherhood had been shattered in one violent night. And then there was Claire, the daughter. She arrived later that day, her face pale as she was told the news. She had been with her mother, away from the house, but the weight of what had happened inside those walls crushed her just the same. To lose a father was tragic. To know her brother was likely responsible was unbearable. The family was collapsing, and investigators knew it. But their job was to push past the emotions, to follow the evidence, and to get the truth from RJ himself. As detectives prepared for interrogation, they studied RJ's behavior closely. He wasn't breaking down in grief. He wasn't begging for answers. Instead, he was calm, almost eerily so. When placed in a holding room, he didn't cry. He didn't demand to see his mother. He simply sat, quiet and detached. To some, it looked like shock, but to seasoned investigators, it looked like calculation. They knew this case would hinge not just on the blood evidence, but on RJ's own words. If they could corner him in his lies, break through his calm exterior, the truth would spill out. And so, the stage was set. RJ Gulia, 31 years old, son of Theodore and Anna, sat alone in an interrogation room. On the other side of the glass, detectives reviewed the crime scene photos, the shattered lamp, the blood-soaked carpet, the mangled body of Ted Gulia. They had one goal: to make RJ explain what happened. But what they didn't yet know was just how disturbing that explanation would be. As night fell on November 11th, the Gulia home was no longer a place of warmth and family gatherings. It was sealed off, a crime scene marked by yellow tape and the shadows of violence. Neighbors whispered, shaken by the sight of police cars and forensic vans. Inside the family, grief and disbelief rippled like shockwaves. Anna sat numb, clutching her daughter's hand. Ben paced angrily, unable to sit still. Claire sobbed quietly in the corner. Theodore was gone. His life had been stolen in the most violent way imaginable. And while the family clung to each other for comfort, one truth became harder and harder to deny. The killer wasn't some faceless intruder. It wasn't a stranger. It was RJ. And soon the interrogation room would bring that truth into the light. Inside the small windowless room, the weight of silence pressed down on RJ Gulia. The walls were bare. The table was cold steel. A recording camera blinked quietly in the corner. Detectives entered with files in their hands, thick folders filled with photos, evidence logs, and timelines. They placed them deliberately on the table, letting their weight land with authority. "Robert," one detective began, his voice calm but firm, "we need to talk about what happened in this house." At first, RJ stuck to the same rehearsed lines. He didn't know what had happened. He had woken up and found his father injured. Maybe someone had broken in. Maybe his mother knew more. But the detectives were ready. They showed him photos of the upstairs bedroom, blood covering the walls, the broken lamp smeared in red. They explained the blood spatter evidence, how it showed multiple blows delivered from close range. This wasn't an accident, Robert. This wasn't a fall. This was an attack. RJ shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His eyes darted from the photos to the detectives, but his face stayed strangely blank. Hours dragged on. Detectives pressed harder. Each time they exposed a lie, RJ scrambled to create a new one. At one point, he claimed he had been asleep downstairs when he heard noises upstairs. By the time he went to check, he said, his father was already hurt.
Become more evident as the interrogation continues.
I don't have a full understanding of.
I'm just taking the blame as man. 100% it's me. I'm not looking for any cop out or anything. If I could hug my dad right now, I would.
I know you would.
He's a tough guy. He didn't want to go. So if it looks like it was extreme, I just wanted him to die. I didn't want him to suffer. And that's why it looked so bad and bloody. I didn't know what I was doing.
I understand that. I understand that 100%.
So that would be my only cop-out comment about it is I didn't know what I was doing and it looks gruesome, but I just wanted him to go fast.
Okay.
And have it be over with.
But when asked why his fingerprints were on the bloody lamp, his story changed. "Maybe I touched it after," he suggested weakly. "Maybe I tried to move it." The detectives leaned in. "Robert, the blood shows transfer. It shows you were holding it when it struck your father." RJ swallowed hard. His calm demeanor began to fray. Finally, in a halting voice, he muttered, He just wouldn't stop yelling at me." Piece by piece, the truth spilled out. RJ admitted that the night before, he and his father had argued again. Ted had criticized him for not working, for not helping around the house, for wasting his life. It was a fight they had had countless times before, but this time, something in RJ snapped. Fueled by anger, humiliation, and years of resentment, RJ grabbed a nearby lamp and swung it at his father's head. The impact stunned Ted, sending him reeling. But instead of stopping, RJ kept going. He hit him again and again, each strike fueled by rage. When the lamp broke, he grabbed a flashlight. The attack continued until Ted collapsed, barely recognizable from the beating. "I didn't mean to kill him," RJ claimed quietly. "I just wanted him to shut up." But the brutality of the scene told a different story. This wasn't a single moment of loss of control. It was a prolonged, violent assault. And when it was over, RJ dragged his father's body into another room, covering him with a blanket as though hiding the evidence would somehow erase the crime. The room fell silent as RJ spoke his final words in confession. "He was my dad, but I couldn't take it anymore." For detectives, the confession closed the case. But for the Gulia family, it opened a wound that would never fully heal.
So it's some sort of like ailment where he can't deal with like closed doors, so he like tears them down. He said RJ did that. I don't know if Old Man did it.
Well, that didn't.
Not that.
Either I could have a poor recollection of it because it was years and years ago.
Yeah.
Anna sat in disbelief when told the news. Her son, her own flesh and blood, had murdered her husband. She struggled to reconcile the image of the troubled boy she had raised with the violent killer described in the interrogation. Ben was consumed with fury. He had lost his father, and in his eyes, his brother was gone too. The bond of family had been severed beyond repair. And Claire wept as she asked the question no one could answer. Why? Why had RJ allowed his anger to boil over into murder? Why had he destroyed their family in one night of rage? In the months that followed, prosecutors built their case meticulously. They presented the physical evidence, the blood, the weapons, the drag marks. They played clips from the interrogation, showing how RJ's lies unraveled until the truth finally emerged. The jury heard about the years of conflict between father and son, the constant arguments, the resentment that festered in RJ's mind. But they also saw the brutality of the crime, the sheer number of blows, the force required, the cold, detached way RJ spoke afterward. In the end, there was no doubt. RJ Gulia was found guilty of murdering his father. On the day of sentencing, the courtroom was heavy with emotion. Family members filled the benches, their faces a mixture of grief and anger. Anna sat quietly, clutching a tissue in her hand. Ben stared forward, his jaw tight. Claire avoided RJ's eyes altogether. When asked if he had anything to say, RJ stood slowly. His voice was low, almost inaudible. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't mean it to go this far." But for the family, the words rang hollow. Sorry couldn't bring Ted back. Sorry couldn't undo the violence. Sorry couldn't mend a devastation left behind. The judge spoke firmly, condemning the brutality of the crime and the betrayal of a father by his own son. RJ was sentenced to life in prison, with no possibility of parole for decades. The gavel struck. The case was closed. For the Gulia family, there would never be true closure. Every holiday, every family gathering would carry the shadow of absence. Theodore's chair at the table would remain empty, and the knowledge that it was RJ, not a stranger, not an intruder, but their own son and brother who caused it, was a wound that time could never fully heal. Neighbors who once waved at the family across the street now spoke of the tragedy in hushed tones. The Gulia home, once filled with ordinary family noise, was remembered only as a crime scene, a place where anger boiled over into bloodshed. For detectives, the case was a stark reminder of how thin the line can be between tension and tragedy. Domestic disputes happen in countless households every day, but in the Gulia home, it escalated to the ultimate act of violence.